So I immediately leave the floor to Marek Tamm. Marek probably doesn't need any presentation in this room because he's the principal investigator of this project, but still, for the record, I'm going to say just that he's professor of cultural history at the School of Humanities here in Tallinn, Tallinn University. He's member of Estonian Academy of Science and head of Tallinn University Center of Excellence in Intercultural Studies and of Estonia Graduate School of Cultural Studies and Arts. He has a master's degree in medieval studies from the École des Hautes Études and Sciences Sociales in Paris and in medieval history in Tallinn University. He's author of 5 books. Many of them are devoted to Lotman and thought of Yuri Lotman in semiotics of culture. And today he's going to deliver a paper about the media fabric. The workings of digital memory. I'm going to share the screen, which is I have to open
the wave one.
Yeah. This one.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe you want to
play.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It's a last day, and finally I can say something content-wise of the project. And actually, it's a preliminary talk about a long-term project in progress, and even it's focused now on the concept of digital culture memory. Actually, it's a part of a wider. So it's part of a larger project about the rise of digital historicity. And the key argument is very simple, that this new digital condition that also Hanno was talking yesterday, in my mind, brings along a new sense of historicity, a different way of being in time, different way of conceiving change over time, or to put it bluntly, digital historicity refers to this digitally mediated relationship with the past, and I think it's critically important in the light of this emerging digital historicity to rethink what we consider to be the past and its relation with the present in our digital age. What happens to our sense of historicity when it is processed by the digital? How these new digital tools, new digital environments shape or mold our mnemonic practices and our historical thinking. So this is the general background of today's talk, but as I said, I will be focusing on one key element within this digital historicity, namely the workings of digital cultural memory. But let me start by a kind of motto, a quote from Henry Hoskins, who has been one of the first memory scholars to attempt to think through the outcomes of digital turn for collective memory. I'm not maybe always following his thinking in the sense that he tends to be too radical sometimes, arguing, for instance, that digital memory means the end of collective memory. I think that actually just a change in the workings of collective or cultural memory. But in this quote that comes from an important volume, Digital Memory Studies, published a few years ago, he argues, I think, very well that this new digital condition, or this connective turn, as you call it, has re-engineered memory, liberating it from the traditional bounds of the spatial archive, the organization, the institution, and distributed it on a continuous basis via a connectivity between brains, bodies, and personal and public lives.
Mark, just a second, because Anna Maria is telling me that they are not, can see the screen.
You might be that you have like switching between different screens.
So let's just put this. Yeah.
various desktops.
Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, okay. But you didn't miss much because there was a few points on the previous slides. So this is the quote I'm commenting from Henry Hoskins, and which will kind of guide my thoughts throughout the next couple of few minutes. So when we talk about memory, and I mean collective, or as I prefer to call it, culture memory, the digital age, there have been some important changes or shifts happening, and my attempt today is to map some of these major changes. And I indeed rely on this well-known concept of culture memory, often associated with the work of Jan and Aleida Assmann, but actually coined and first theorized by Yuri Lotman. And there has been already some scholars using the concept of digital culture memory, which is basically, again, referring to various forms of culture memory conveyed by digital mediations, by digital media technologies. So it's, again, important to see what happens with the workings of culture memory within the digital condition. Of course, I'm not the first one to reflect on these issues, and I wanted to point out, instead of sort of historiographic survey, a couple of authors that has been critical for my own thinking on the topic. To start with a Dutch scholar, which is very relevant because we are having also many Dutch scholars here, Jose van Dijk, and her book Mediated Memories in the Digital Age, which was published already in 2007, and which is kind of the early bird of among these other publications dealing with the workings of digital memory. She focuses on this idea of mediated memory, but the book is more about personal digital memory than collective or cultural digital memory. So that's the difference. But nevertheless, I think the book provides many useful conceptual tools and even many empirical examples about the workings of, or to analyze the workings of digital cultural memory. But also she emphasizes the importance of this new paradigmatic shift, arguing that the digital turn or digitization doesn't only redefine our notion of memory, but actually substantially revises our concepts of self and society. And another colleague I would like to mention in the beginning is a Belgian scholar of memory studies, Silvana Mandolesi, who was also just finished the ERC project on digital memories, and has published recently last year two sort of programmatic articles about the digital turn memory studies and memory in the digital age. Also recommended readings for anybody who is interested in these topics, and both should be open access, so easily available. But so based on these works and many others, and on my own thinking, I would propose today to address what I consider as 5 major transformations that culture memory has undergone in the digital age. Some of these are, I think, well known to everybody, but the idea is to give some more or less comprehensive conceptual mapping of these transformations. So the first is about dynamization of culture memory. Second, about the post-scarcity of culture memory. Then the algorithmization of culture memory, the democratization of culture memory, and last not least, the reconfiguration of agency in culture memory, or what I call modern human culture memory. So let's start. I will just provide you some of my preliminary ideas about each of these 5 transformations with some quotations from relevant literature. So actually, over the last 3 days, we have been already addressing this issue of the new dynamics of culture memory at the digital age, or we can call it also a kind of new ontology of culture memory in the digital age, referring to this idea that the culture memory is increasingly dynamic and fluid and flexible and mutable and so on and so forth, that digital objects that are the foundation of the workings of digital memory, such as code, hyperlinks, and multimedia, are in this kind of constant processual mode, and therefore we are clearly kind of departing from the earlier, still dynamic, but however much more stable or even static forms of cultural memory. I think also this idea of Wolfgang Ernst has been already mentioned, but I still find it very important that we can characterize the shift also in terms of temporalization of culture memory, that this kind of space becomes temporalized, as he argues in various articles, including this one I refer to, the archive as metaphor from archival space to archival time. So yeah, the idea that this spatial idea of archive is becoming temporal ones. And of course, it's very nice that Wolfgang Ernst was, I would say, made known among English-speaking memory scholars and media scholars, thanks to Jussi Parikka, was talking yesterday and is member of a project advisory board in this book called Digital Memory and the Archive. And Jussi has written a long and very interesting introduction to this book. And just I gave you a few quotes from the book where Ernst argues that, yeah, the archive is no longer simply a passive storage space, but becomes generative itself in algorithmically ruled processuality. And I will come back to this idea of algorithmicity, but this idea of processuality, of course, is critical in order to make sense of the workings of digital archives in particular and digital memory in general. But I'm happy to share a quote from Matteo's book, which I think is very important, even it's very small. Qu'est-ce que c'est le patrimoine numérique? What is the digital heritage? Une sémiologie de la circulation des archives, the semiotics of the circulation of archives, and also one of the, let's say, takeaway messages of the book is that there is a paradigmatic shift from the archival institution as a closed place that one accesses to the idea of dynamic place that produces content and disseminates it in the media space. So this is the first, probably most evident point. The second refers to this discussion we just had actually about memory and new memory and forgetting, or remembering and forgetting dialectics in the digital age. Because indeed we have, most of the memory discourse over centuries have been about scarcity, about how to indeed preserve as much as possible from the past. Now we are moving from this scarcity discourse to the post-scarcity discourse, to this data abundance discourse. And we are more worried or kind of have to tackle with this difficult question of the overabundance of information in the way also of collective memory, and digital technology creates an environment which might be illusionary but still very strongful, namely this idea of permanent memory. That nothing will ever disappear. As you know, there's a lot of cases about people wanting to delete something about their own personal past that actually it might not be possible if technically it could be possible. But however, there is this idea of nothing will disappear ever. But of course, and actually Matteo underlined this earlier, that this permanent memory has its kind of hidden side, which is ephemeral side, that actually digital memory can also disappear at every moment, at least in principle, considering this eventual digital blackout situation. So actually it's very interesting sort of dynamics of, on the one hand, this idea of permanent memory, of overabundance of memory, but on the other hand, this fear of losing the digital content because of its ephemerality and reliance upon this digital infrastructure on energy, electricity, and so on and so forth. Also, this issue has been discussed in various publications. I refer here to another interesting and inspiring collective volume, Save As, Digital Memories, and in the introduction, the editors of the volume also emphasize this idea of shift from scarcity to abundance or post scarcity, and they also argue that the digital suggests that we may need to rethink how we conceive of memory, that we are changing what we consider to be the past, that the act of recall, of recollection, and of remembering is changing in itself, not least because of this cheap data storage provided by digital media and technologies. And yet another bit random quote from, I think, a very interesting and inspiring book by Elena Esposito, Italian-German sociologist, and one of actually her latest book, Artificial Communication, How Algorithms Produce Social Intelligence, make an interesting proposal to rename artificial intelligence to artificial communication, which I think makes a good point indeed. I think there is no intelligence, but a lot of communication. But among other things, she also emphasizes this new ways of remembering and forgetting at the time of artificial memory, as she calls it, yeah, this virtually unlimited capacity to store and process data has marked a sort of paradigmatic change in our understanding of what can be preserved and what cannot. So the third point, also I think something that doesn't surprise you, but it still needs a further study in my mind, namely the algorithmization of cultural memory, or the emergence of what could be called the algorithmic memory, in the sense that a lot of this digital memory is shaped or curated by various computational rules, often connected to various corporate interests, and without even knowing a lot of our understanding what is forth of knowing from the past collectively is increasingly kind of filtered or shaped by these algorithms, which are not, which I mean, remain opaque or not visible for many of us as rulers, and this issue will of course get even more important with the rise of AI and machine learning systems that increasingly take over the task of organizing and retrieving the digital information. So the human memory is increasingly being regulated or shaped by non-human actors.
Anna Maria says that again the slides disappeared, but why? In order to be sure. Sorry for this.
Yeah.
There is.
I can see them.
You can see them.
Yeah.
And
Now?
okay, now is okay.
Okay, because I think that what we see there is what you should see.
Exactly. It's okay. That's a mystery.
Now it's
but that's actually, we are probably being again curated by some algorithms we are not able to control.
Yeah.
So I think indeed, let me see. I was making my point on the algorithmization of cultural memory, and move on to the fourth point, which might be more, to say, debatable, namely what I would call democratization of cultural memory, or referring to an important book as a memory gone rogue. Namely, one can easily argue that the digital technologies have democratized memory in the sense that everybody having access to internet and various online collections, or having smartphones, can start contributing to the archive, establishing personal archival collections or any other kinds of collections of digital content, and there is a very large amount of these user-generated content across the web, including blogs and tweets and videos and other items. And it seems that when usually all these memory institutions, including archives and libraries and museums, have been, led and curated by specialists, deciding what should be preserved and what not, the digital culture memory is more like collectively co-created by various agents, and we can talk about the decentralization of memory practices, making various often contested or conflictual historical representations more accessible. But indeed, the price that comes along is that these various relationships with the past are increasingly conflictual and even polarizing. And so the democratization doesn't mean necessarily only something useful and good, but can also create new problems. But anyhow, we can notice very many various sort of amateur communities contributing to the workings of memory, of culture memory in the digital age. And the book I was referring to earlier is yet another very early one of the first examples of the study of digital culture memory, the concept the author Abigail de Kosnik explicitly uses. But in a way, it's very, I would say, a kind of optimistic study about the democratization of culture memory at the digital age, arguing that these various online communities are becoming more important than traditional memory curators, institutional memory curators, and therefore, as she puts it, having fallen under the sway of rogues, culture memory has become more democratic. And last not least, and this is something that I'm probably personally most interested, namely the reconfiguration of agency in cultural memory, or as I call it, the rise of modern human culture memory. And this is, of course, related to the topics, again, we discussed earlier, that a lot of digital information, including digital heritage, digital archives, are being co-created by various machines, by various non-human actors. And we should increasingly consider these non-human actors as part of digital cultural heritage. And all this metadata, algorithmic data created by various technological actors, but also all the infrastructure that we are talking about, the digital materiality that we need in order to carry on and preserve the digital memory. All these actually are also should be considered as part of digital cultural heritage and digital cultural memory in more general. So actually, we might be facing a challenge to move away from the earlier sort of humanist or anthropocentric narratives of heritage, especially in these days where the machine learning is very much reshaping the way culture memory is produced, curated, and understood. And here I think the key book is by an American scholar, Fiona Cameron, The Future of Digital Data, Heritage and Curation in a Modern Human World. This is a kind of book-long argument about the need to expand the idea of cultural heritage and more specifically of digital cultural heritage. As she puts it, this is no longer solely a reflection of human creativity, but also encompasses the creative impulses of a wide range of other than human actors. And indeed, it doesn't mean only about non-human actors, but also she hints about including the more than human actors, including various other forms of life than only humans. That she wrote, emerging genres of digital data and digital machines are all potential heritages. AI, machine learning, and social bots are all involved in heritage-like making practices, and at the same time, many are potential objects of heritage. New hybrid forms are emerging, such as 3D printed materials. So these all new players or actors or agents should be considered as part of this large understanding of digital cultural heritage. So let me conclude with a couple of arguments. First, that digital cultural memory should be understood as a dynamic and constantly evolving process. It's kind of provisional, adaptable, and open to future developments. And secondly, more importantly, we should try to develop new concepts, new metaphors, new frameworks to understand how culture memory operates in the state of constant becoming, and also, as I said just a second ago, this means also including more than human or other than human and non-human actors in the producing of culture memory. So that's it. And yeah, I guess we have even time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marek. I think you raised many questions that are central, the issues are central for our project. In particular, we started discussing yesterday about this more than human memory, which is a topic that's really interesting. We know the aporis and the paradoxes and fiction we were saying yesterday, but still, actually, talking of digital cultural heritage, we have the massive production of that of AI. What shall we do with this? Should we preserve all the thing? Of course not. So against that paradigm of obsessive preservation, what are the necessity to preserve AI generated text, for example? It could be that in 100 years, if we don't preserve those texts now, it will be considered as a loss. Okay, we are preserving the algorithm, of course, and the tool, but still we don't know if to trace the evolution, if also sampling some text and preserving those texts generated by AI should be useful. So this is more than human, and also it's not just AI, but there are many actors. It's a very complicated issue, and I'm very interested to know more about this. I don't know if there are any questions, or yes, please, Mira. And then yeah.
And first.
Who is first? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mark. This maybe just a small comment just to tease our ideas, because this whole advancement of technology and the whole move beyond the human factor in shaping cultural heritage, maybe we are getting the impression that we already have a lot of data. So actually the question is that, have we reached a moment in time, or are we going to reach a moment of time where actually we don't need to make heritage anymore? Heritage can be already made. That's one thing. The second thing is that why I'm asking this moment in time is actually to tease our notions of agency. Because can the data, and regardless of all the discussions about how the possibility of not losing or beyond repository, or that we are preserving, or we are not going to lose all this material. So it actually goes back to Andreas Heissen, this whole fear of forgetting. You see, that's it's not, we are not really interested in memory as much as the fear of forgetting. That is our drive. But I'm wondering about the danger actually of giving the image or the idea that we already have a lot of data and a lot of things. So maybe we don't need to actually talk about heritage anymore, because heritage can reconstruct itself. is this a scenario we're thinking about? And what happens actually with what type of that kind of heritage? Is it like meaningful anymore for human beings? You see, the whole idea of heritage, regardless of its preservation or transmission, we are forgetting maybe one element here, that actually heritage is meaningless in itself, that we always give it a meaning. It's not just a matter that heritage is out there in the abstract form. It's actually heritage means something to me as a subject. So I think the agency is also not just the agency of the computer, but the agency or the identification of the human, that could be a part of our discussion.
I mean, I would even argue that the heritage as a concept itself is a meaning-making act, in the sense that we decide that something from the past is meaningful for us and therefore becomes heritage. So it's not that heritage is waiting out there and we will give meaning to this, but actually heritage is the outcome of the semiotic act of considering something of valuable, of meaningful for us. And in this regard, indeed, we might ask whether for machines or whether for non-human actors we should talk about heritage. And I think this is also something that was mentioned by Matteo, or should talk about data, because it's clear that all these machine learning tools demand data, they work based on data. And so that's what is heritage for us, could be data for non-human actors. And in this regard, there will be a constant demand for this kind of information in order to provide better tools and better machines. But the question is whether the term modern human or non-human heritage is a contradiction in terms, in the sense that again, we kind of project our human perspective on non-human actors, and this might be misleading. But in this regard, it's maybe more interesting to indeed combine these two. And I think the hybridization is at least a temporary situation until we will have never been, which is one scenario. But for now, actually, it's in the situation of co-creating heritage together with non-human actors. And in this regard, I think it requires new ways of thinking, because so far heritage and memory has been very, human-centric concepts. But actually, these non-human actors shape this memory and heritage more and more, and therefore have to be taken into account. And actually, retrospectively, we can even argue the memory and heritage has never been fully human, and they've always included non-human actors, but just we tend to ignore or not to notice their contribution. But now it's becoming more and more evident.
Yeah, what makes it also very problematic and interesting at the same time is the two concepts of identification and emotions, what we discussed yesterday, because I think whatever data we can give to the machine cannot develop the emotional identification. I don't know, maybe there will be a computer, you can tell me which world we're living in, but it's like the whole idea of that moment, one second, about the emotional development or the development of the emotions in that regard. Because as I said, like the meaningfulness of heritage is very much the subjective, the emotional impact, I think. So that would be a kind of a challenging idea, I think.
Okay, I have 4 more questions. I please ask you to be very short, because we have to move to the last presentation of the morning. I have Mila, Annu, Mario, and Daniele. So please, very short questions.
We might collect all 4 and then
yes, let's collect them and let's try to. There will be maybe time also later to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very interesting. I would like to dwell a little bit on the concept of democratization, because I perhaps wouldn't call it democratization, but I also see the kind of like the shape is changing in a way, because in addition to kind of like what we see as democratization, there are also kind of like some collections are behind paywalls. There are also kind of like different skills may be needed to access those collections and technologies, and so that I think that there is also these kinds of developments happening. And another thing related to this democratization is that you mentioned this kind of like dark side of wide access and kind of like emerging, for instance, fake historical narratives, like, you know, the Russian online sphere and so on. And I was just kind of like interested in, because I think that that's kind of like dark side of the democratization somehow also means that kind of like memory practitioners, like historians and archivists and so on, we maybe need to rethink somehow the practices that we of kind of like using these and making these materials available, and what is kind of like, what is the truth in past and yeah, these kinds of things. So maybe you have some comment on this.
Hanno, Mario, and then
Well, actually, Marek already answered one of the questions, because we might argue that God's memory has always been in a constant state of becoming and always been true and human, but now there's a kind of decisive turn, but it's an ontological turn that also allows us to view the history in another sense. I was actually checking what the Faro Convention says on cultural heritage. It defines it as like people identify as a reflection of an expression of the constantly evolving values, beliefs, knowledge, and traditions. It stresses people. Actually, the interesting question is how it happens in the present day world or in the digital age. Who are actually the people? That's the interesting part in the Faro Agreement. And the third point, I was thinking about the issue of dark heritage. We haven't actually discussed about it so much, but I thought actually we are also living in an age where there is a kind of invisible censorship of which kinds of thoughts are put forward. That's also interesting concept.
Thank you.
Mario, and then like
Okay, really short. It's not a real question actually, but just a follow-up relation to what we said of like knowing human or more than human subjects in relation to memory and the relation of emotion. It's maybe can be said that like non-human or more than human subjects are not feeling emotion, but somehow we can say that like we are tuned. Our body, our phenomenological experience, and also so our affective emotion is tuned with what they are producing. And like just a note, there is a really interesting book by Michael Richardson called Non-Human Witnessing, and there is a chapter or what you called machinic affect. So how the algorithm, even though we cannot say that maybe it's feeling something, but like in a more like it's more affect than emotion, you know. So like it's precognitive, let's say. It's like and like how the machine and the algorithm can affect somehow our experience of the data itself, creating like an affective environment where we are, like, as I said, tuned by those emotions, then become emotions, you know?
Yeah.
So like, it was just like a follow-up comment that came to my mind where we were talking about more than human, because I'm like, I think you're right, like, in terms of heritage, we were always like taking into account more than human actors, of course. Like, but like I think the problem is to understand how in the classical relationship between human and non-human, what's the role of the digital now, and what's the point of having, what's the new phenomenological experience that we can have in this like duality between like the classical interaction between human and more than human or non-human.
and probably you will need 30 minutes.
Yeah, but also, I think that well, we will have the slides, but actually it would make sense to create a bibliography somewhere in
Yes.
our folder where all could add the things. Yeah, well, it's interesting that we all actually were really kind of impressed and excited about this more than human. Me too. So because I guess this is an important question that because when we start to use the AI and all this kind of interactions and co-creation, it's very important. I mean, it's actually fundamentally the way in which we understand AI. I don't think that it's fundamentally what AI is, but the way in which we relate with this. And here I'm kind of very old-fashioned, so because I think it's not artificial intelligence, is definitely not, but I think it's not also not artificial communication. At most, it is some kind of illusionary communications, to say, when we think that we are communicating, but actually there is no, on our part, there's meaning making, but definitely, but there is computation just, I mean, there are algorithms. So I think, well, maybe it's very provocative, but I think the machine is still a tool, so it's nothing more than a tool. So it's a more advanced tool that we have produced, probably. It's more powerful, and maybe this creates some problems. But well, we have also done atomic bombs that have been. There are a lot of tools which are much more. I mean, impactful and negatively impactful than artificial intelligence. In the future, it will be, of course, but still, for me, it's the non-human. I can relate with empathy with animals, definitely, for all the living beings, even with rocks or these kind of things. But well, for some reason, not with. With this, that is a very precious. But I don't deny that it is a really precious and wonderful tool. So that's not
but very short comments, and then we'll move on. I mean, first, of course, I mean, democratization is a term that brings along a lot of positive emotions. But I mean, democracy can be also imperfect, can be problematic. So, and I would then also argue that if we use the concept of democratization of digital culture memory, then it means that there's new problems that arise. But just there is, we can also call it massification or whatever kind of term we prefer. But you are, of course, right. There is a lot of problems that are part of this new democratization, including fake news. And also to Hanno, I mean, yeah, this is, again, I normally try to avoid this kind of paradigmatic shifts and stuff, because it's actually, it's a continuous process, as we historians know, but there is an acceleration that's actually important. I mean, there will always be dynamics in culture memory, but it's much lower. And what's, I think, happening now is that it's becoming so accelerated. And so actually it's more a change of tempo or pace than change of ontology. So in this regard, I do agree. And also to Mario, I think it's one way to describe the human non-human relations in terms of affects, not of emotions. I do agree that it's mostly kind of precognitive, and we have already quite a few interesting cases of some Google engineers falling in love with some, or with some machine learning tools or some other non-human actors, and so it's very difficult to draw the boundary, and I think Harvard's the future will be different. So that's empathy and identification is not only between humans and let's say even between forms of life, but also with non-human actors. And then the same answer actually to Danielle. I mean, it's of course it's one very clear position, and many people will share your position that machine just a tool and that's it. The whole discussion about machine consciousness and Turing test and what's the human, and so I think it's much more complicated issue, and it's actually very difficult to draw the boundaries that these are just tools and that's it.
No, I like it very much for in sci-fi, but I don't see in the present. I cannot see anyway.
I can see, but that's but of course it remains for now speculation and philosophical position. But maybe in the future there will be also empirical kind of evidence, and that when some first machine will pass the Turing test, the world will be different.
But it's also an as if, I mean, so it's simulation. I mean,
you might be simulating. How can I see that you are?
I simulate a lot, well, of course. But I make some meaning, so it's not just simulating.
Listening to the discussion, we will try to find a moment later too, because we are a bit late.